Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. In honor of Memorial Day, we've got a special 1-hour show today featuring cryptids, Bigfoot, tales of the strange, and of course, Dogman. To start the show, we've got a story about a guy who just wanted one thing: to take the day off. But that dream turned into a nightmare because of the Dogman. And we call this all-new story, which takes place on Memorial Day weekend, Day Off Dogman. Dear Scary Stories, about a year ago, I had the strangest day of my life. I think I'm finally ready to talk about it, so here goes. My wife and I bought a house in the country, or really on the edge of the suburbs, near the country. It seemed close to civilization during the day, but cut off from the world at night. At least that's how I felt about it. Of course, I didn't get to spend many days there since I worked in a city that required over 3 hours of traveling each day to get to and back from. My wife works at home, so it was all good news for her, but I was kind of exhausted. When she asked me to go with her and her friends to Mexico for Memorial Day, I pleaded exhaustion, which was 100% true. She took pity on me and split with her friends, giving me 3 full days to veg out and sleep and enjoy the quiet and the sunshine. Of course, it rained Saturday, but I didn't really care because I needed to catch up on my sleep so badly. The sound of the rain pouring down outside was very relaxing and peaceful, and soon I was passed out. I woke up to the sound of someone or something screaming out in my backyard. I got up in shock and tried to walk toward the window, but I guess I wasn't fully awake yet because I tripped and banged my chin. It wasn't any kind of serious thing, but it kind of hurt, and it added to my disorientation. By the time I got to the window, I wasn't sure what I was looking for, and nothing seemed out of place down in the yard below anyway. I wondered if I had really heard the screaming, or if maybe I had dreamed it. After all, it sounded so loud that I wasn't sure it could have been real. Would I have heard someone screaming from the yard so clearly from my bed with the windows shut? It took me a while, but I did fall back asleep eventually, until a crack of thunder shook my entire house and woke me up again. Nothing like waking up in a state of shock to get your heart going. As I sat there in bed, trying to calm back down, I thought I heard the sound of a dog howling in the rain. Someone forgot to let their dog in when the thunderstorm started, I thought to myself. Then I felt bad for the dog wherever it was. I had a headache from lack of sleep, but decided to go downstairs and eat something and maybe watch some bad TV until I felt like trying to sleep again. Eating and watching TV, I found the headache extremely distracting, so I walked to the bathroom to get some kind of aspirin or whatever my wife had bought. I almost never use anything like that, but then again, I almost never get headaches. That bathroom had an odd construction in that the bathroom mirror faced a window out onto the backyard. I got my aspirin or whatever it was, took it, drank some water, swallowed the pills, then closed the mirror door to the medicine cabinet. As I closed that door, I saw a monster face staring back at me. I screamed and ran out of the room all the way back to the TV room, staring behind me the whole time. My first impression was that a monster was standing behind me in the bathroom. But even while I was screaming, and even while I was still running, I already had realized that what I saw must have been outside the window in the backyard. So, next, my mind ran over all the things that could possibly have been out there that I might have mistaken for a monster face. After all, I only saw the thing for a split second before I ran out. It might have been an optical illusion. I still couldn't think of anything out there which I might have mistaken for what I saw, though. And to be honest, I wasn't even sure what I saw. I mean, it looked like a hairy nightmare face, and I guess it was dark brown fur. But other than that, I hadn't looked long enough to know what I was seeing. Part of me wanted to go back into the bathroom to look again, but the other part of me said, what if it really was a monster? So I sat back down on the couch in front of the TV, but I turned the TV off and just listened. We have big picture windows on 2 walls of the TV room, and I was feeling a bit exposed. What if there was some lunatic with a Halloween mask walking around my house? I began to feel extremely vulnerable, but I kept telling myself I was just paranoid from lack of sleep and too much work. I had just about convinced myself that I was being too jumpy when this hairy monster literally came strolling around the house from the direction of the bathroom. I tell you, this thing stopped mid-step when it saw me and I saw it. I think it was more surprised by me somehow than I was by it, but I don't know why. I failed to see how it could have been threatened by me in any way, whereas I was staring at this football player in a monster costume, basically. Except I don't think it was a costume. It looked too real. So what did it look like, I can hear you asking? Okay, let me start from the beginning. It was tall, very tall. It was covered in dark fur, probably made darker by the rain, which was pretty intense at that moment. The fur, or hair, looked like it was 3 or 4 inches long and straight, and water poured off it everywhere. It had dog legs on bottom, but some kind of monster arms on top, like human arms, but clawed like a cat. Maybe like a dog, but they looked sharper than dog claws, and the paws were wider and more hand-like than either dog or cat claws. Its head looked exactly like a dog, but also not exactly like a dog. I'm not sure how else to put it. It looked evil, not angry, not frightened, not agitated, but evil, like conniving, like it was out to trick you or mess with you. It seemed as though it were out to cause trouble. The ears stood up, but not all the time. When it first saw me and looked surprised, the ears were both up, and the eyes got wide. Almost immediately, though, its face adopted an expression that seemed more like a grin or a leer, and it gave the vibe off that it was enjoying thinking of terrible things it could do to bother me. I was thinking where it would make the most sense to run to. Should I run upstairs, or should I run to the basement? It could probably get into the house easily through any of our large windows, at least if it was as strong as it looked. As I watched it watching me, I started to hope it would just go away so that I wouldn't have to run anywhere. That's when the thing leaned forward and screamed. It was the same scream that had awakened me, the scream I thought I might have dreamed. I watched the picture window vibrate in and out, and I was certain it was going to break. I ran out of that room and toward the stairs. When I was halfway up, I changed my mind and decided the basement might be safer. Just then, I heard that dogman howling, and I resumed running upstairs. I closed and locked the bedroom door, then moved the dresser in front of it, and went back to look out the window to see if I could make out anything going on downstairs. I didn't expect to get any sleep, but I reasoned that I should lay down on the bed and close my eyes anyway, because the rest might do my headache good, and calming down in general is better than stressing out. So I laid on that bed and listened as I heard something down on the ground floor scratching at some part of the exterior of the house. It was an extremely unpleasant sound, made worse by the fact that I knew what was making it. And I knew that sound meant that thing was trying to break in. I wished I could call someone for help, but we weren't too friendly with the neighbors in those days. I wished I could call the cops, but I couldn't tell them that my house was under attack by a dogman. I'd lose all credibility locally. Then it dawned on me. I could say I heard someone breaking in. The cops would send someone over, and the cop car would likely scare the dogman away. I got up, excited that I had come up with something to do to save myself. Then I realized I'd left my cell phone downstairs. Well, why didn't you use the landline, you might be asking? I argued my wife out of getting a landline installed. I pointed out we had received a grand total of 3 phone calls on the landline in our old apartment, not including junk calls. She agreed with me, so we have no landline, and therefore I was trapped alone in my bedroom with my laptop and cell phone downstairs, where there was a werewolf-like monster trying to come in from out of the rain. The sky only grew darker as the storm raged on into the night. Thunderstorms usually last 15 or 20 minutes where we live, but this one seemed like the end of the world and just kept on going. It was so loud that I wasn't sure what sounds meant someone was breaking into the house and what sounds meant a tree had just lost one of its branches in the wind. I spent part of the night with my covers pulled up over my head, and another part of the night in the fetal position, praying that the monster wouldn't find me. I think I did get a little sleep, but not very much, and with the morning, the rain let up a little, but again, not really very much. I looked around outside, and I couldn't see the monster, but I knew that didn't mean it wasn't still there. Making my way downstairs, I found my phone and texted my wife to ask her for the details of where she was so that I could join her and her friends after all. I slept on the plane. Then I spent the last day and a half of the weekend sleeping at the seedy hotel she had chosen. It may have been a smelly room. The room service might have been bad and overpriced, and the AC might not have fully cooled down that room, but at least there were no werewolves outside my window, so the trip was worth every single penny. Now I hear you ask, did you move out of that dogman house? And the answer might surprise you. No, We didn't. After I caught up on my sleep, I just had no fear that the monster would still be there when we got home. I don't have any conscious reason why I felt that way, but it had just passed like the storm. I never told my wife about the Dogman, so she had no reason to fear it either. She's never told me about seeing anything like that ever, and I haven't seen it since. So I completely have no explanation for what happened the time I was sleep deprived, thanks to the Day Off Dogman. Hey everyone, it's me, Henry Lee Dogman. Your old pal Bigfoot doesn't know I'm uploading this video. He disapproves of these stories since they're about Sasquatch behaving in a terrifying manner. He claims this is my attempt to smear his people, but who even knows if these stories are true? Just because one person says this happened to them doesn't guarantee veracity. And if we only told stories about Bigfoot that could be proven true without a doubt in a court of law, why, we wouldn't have any Bigfoot stories left to be told at all. So now, with your awareness that your old pal Bigfoot says none of the following stories could possibly be true, why don't we go ahead and let you all make up your own minds? Here's the first story. He could call Bigfoot with his mind. I once met a man who was so evil, I think he was more evil than he was man. He had the ability to call Sasquatch to him at will, and he had the power to make them do horrible things to anyone who crossed him. When I was in my late 20s, this would have been in the second half of the 1950s, I worked doing sales for an automobile parts company in the Midwest. I would work to get our parts into stores, which were mostly not chains yet back then. It meant a lot of traveling local back roads and making business friends whenever possible. My favorite store to visit was in Illinois. My contact there was a lovely young lady we can call Franny for the sake of this story. She was nicer than she was beautiful, and I couldn't understand why she wasn't married. She always turned me down in a friendly manner when I would ask to see her socially, and I guess that's what she did with all men, but I didn't understand why. Then, one time, when I went to the store, Franny seemed shy or embarrassed, and she told me she wasn't making decisions anymore about buying items for the store. She put someone else in charge and got in the car with me to guide me to where my new contact was. We drove and drove up north, past Oakland and even still further. The entire time, Franny was being friendly, but avoiding answering any questions or making anything but the most shallow of conversation. She was so beautiful sitting there, yet so troubled. I wished I could fix her problems and find a way for both of us to be closer. I was so transfixed that I almost didn't notice a bear running out into the road in front of the car. I swerved to the right. The animal ran off on its hind legs to our left, and we ended up in a small ditch on the side of the road by the time I brought the vehicle to a halt. I asked Franny if she was okay. She said she was, in a cursory fashion, while craning her neck to look around me. She seemed far more worried than hurt. "Can you get this car started?" she asked, "or are we stalled out?" I was taken aback by the question. I told her I didn't know it was so abhorrent to sit next to me. She grew annoyed, then told me that thing might be coming back for us, so we'd better get out of there. I remember laughing in relief. She thought the bear was going to come back and attack us. That's not how a bear would behave. This was back in the day when a lot of women didn't know very much about worldly things, or at least we men didn't feel that they did. So I thought Franny just didn't understand animal behavior. I started lecturing her about bears and how they act, and she asked if I could explain it to her while we got the car back on the road. I complied with her wishes. Soon we were at a house. She said it was her home. An older man with a smirk on his face came to the door to greet us. Let's call him Uncle Silas. He informed me that he would be deciding future purchases and was about to lead me into another room to discuss business when Franny grabbed him by the shoulder and asked if she could speak to him privately. Uncle Silas indicated that he would be happy to speak to her after his business with me was done, but Franny insisted that she needed to talk to him immediately, and she seemed absolutely livid about something. I had never seen her so angry, and in fact I'm not sure I ever saw anyone struggling so hard to contain their fury. I was duly impressed and made note. Franny was more than just a pretty face and a good businesswoman. She had passion in her as well. Too bad she wouldn't date me. It seemed as though we were both going to end up old maids. There ensued a bit of hollering and fussing, loud enough for me to hear from the room they left me in. It seemed that both of them were raising their voices. I wondered what was going on in this family. As the maid refreshed my lemonade, I asked her quietly why Franny was no longer in charge of purchases for the store. At first, reticent about speaking, I slipped her some coin of the realm, and she told me a few bits of information. Franny's parents had died suddenly from a wild animal attack. The coroner never explained whether it was death by bear, wolf, coyote, cat. It was a ridiculously vague cause of death. The store then went, not to Franny, but to her father's brother Silas. According to the will, Silas only had control until Franny was married. Then he would cede control and inherit a set amount of money. Franny tried for years to find a husband, but each potential mate would die suddenly from an animal attack, very similar to her parents. Silas had let Franny continue her work at the store for the first few years, but recently their relationship had soured dramatically, and Silas punished Franny by limiting her responsibilities and powers after that. He threatened to write her out of his will, which would mean she would lose all control or interest in the store. She had no choice but to abide by his wishes and hope she outlived him, as she was certain he was the one behind the animal attacks and that he would never allow her to marry. After some time, Silas came back to me, acting as though nothing had happened. He was all business, not a bit of frivolity or lightness about him. He sat down across from me and glared at me. "Your products," he said, "are substandard and overpriced, but they appeal to a certain less knowledgeable part of our customer base. After you cut your price in half, we will order 1/3 of our usual amount." I started to reply as he got up and informed me he would be back shortly with his checkbook and that I should please have the figures ready before his return. I was flummoxed. I had never met such a jerk before. Suddenly, into the room burst Franny, looking like the devil was chasing her. She fell at my knees and begged me to leave immediately and take her with me. I was stunned. This was sort of my dream, and yet it was not the way I pictured it or would have wanted it to happen. I asked her if she wanted to go to the movies with me that Friday night. I was trying to slow her down. "You don't understand," she whispered to me, crying. "I told him that you love me. He's going to rewrite his will to cut me out by tomorrow morning. We need to get married tonight to get the store back. Tomorrow will be too late." My head was spinning. This was all a bit much. Could Silas even legally do that? I told her she needed to see a lawyer, not a justice of the peace. She told me he would send the beast after me, whether I left with her or without her, and begged me to take her with me. I laughed about the idea of him sending a bear after us. She got fed up with me and told me, "It's not a bear." Then she went into this rant and tirade about how her Uncle Silas learned bad sorcery from a wizard and could make hairy, cannibalistic cavemen come out of the woods and caves and attack anyone he told them to. She said the beasts were 7 foot tall or taller, and they had faces so ugly that some people died of fright after looking at them. This was all too much. I had no reason to sit and watch a beautiful young woman lose her mind, and I had no reason to stay to sell her creepy uncle 1/3 of the usual amount at 1/6 the usual price. I got up to leave and told Franny I hoped her family would get all its troubles worked out. She collapsed to the floor in a fit of tears and sobbing. I felt bad, but that stuff she was saying was sort of crazy talk, and I wanted a normal life, not a crazy one. I got in my car and turned the ignition. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw that bear again. Laughing at myself for being jumpy even before looking, the smile fell off my face when I saw not a bear, but an incredibly ugly, hairy, giant, man-like monster thing. It looked at me and charged in my direction. I saw that my passenger seat window was still open from earlier and I panicked. Instead of driving away, I leaned over and tried to turn the knob shutting the window. When I looked up, I was greeted with the most terrifying sight of my life. Face pressed against the window only a few inches from mine was some kind of half-man, half-ape thing. Its eyes were wide and looked all over the interior of my vehicle as though it were looking at a succulent steak. Its mouth was open far wider than any man's mouth could ever open, and that thing's teeth were nothing like those of a man or even a normal ape. It had fangs that were more like a cat's than a dog's, and more like a snake's than a cat's. The eyes were the most insane thing I'd ever seen. They practically glowed. The thing looked like a caveman with radioactive eyes. It was hairy all around its head, but had no mustache or beard like a modern man. It looked like a primitive vampire or a cave vampire covered in hair. If I saw it again today, I'm sure I would say there's Bigfoot, but back then I didn't know that word yet, so my mind raced to make all these comparisons to other things it reminded me of. It wasn't an ape because it moved like a man, but it wasn't a man either. I've seen bonobo apes since then, and if you can imagine a savage bonobo with predator fangs and absolutely freaked out glowing eyes, that would be close to this. It was really hyper too. There was nothing relaxed about this particular monster. I tore out of there like I was leaving the scene of a bank robbery, but that thing overtook me before I was halfway down the driveway. It was inhumanly fast, agile, and strong. It ran into my car and the front wheels briefly lifted off the ground each time. I saw no choice but to swerve into the monster, trying to time my swerves to match with his but be slightly ahead of his. It didn't work. He was mashing up my car door, and soon there would be no barrier at all between me and this death-faced, hairy man thing. This was what Franny had told me would happen. Maybe this thing really was under the control of her uncle. Maybe that really wasn't a bear that I had avoided hitting earlier. Maybe Franny wasn't acting crazy after all. I'd like to tell you that I swerved my vehicle around, heroically rescued the maiden, flew her by helicopter to the Justice of the Peace, and that she is my wife to this day, but that would be a lie. I swerved out of the driveway out onto the highway directly in front of a delivery truck that was speeding and not watching where it was going. I made it in front and hit the gas while they hit the brakes, and we both just managed to barely not hit each other. The Bigfoot had been on my left, and so it either should have been hit by that truck, or just avoided it like me, or chosen some third option. I looked in my rearview mirror and was never able to see it or any evidence of what had become of it. I begged off working that store anymore, but my boss told me I had to because it was on my route. I refused, and he switched my routes with me and this guy named Stevens. Years later, on the day Stevens retired, we had a party for him. After he got loose enough and we were all reminiscing, I asked him whatever became of Franny. He told me that he didn't know who that was, that he did all his business directly with Silas. I guess the poor girl got cut out of the will and had to fend for herself. I felt guilty. I had failed her when she asked for my help. I had wanted for years to be her guy. Then, when the time came, I ruined her life instead and almost got myself killed by that caveman thing in the process. And all this happened because he could call Bigfoot with his mind. Bigfoot smelled my girlfriend's socks. The title of this story may sound funny, but when it happened, I could just as easily have called it Bigfoot Got in My Face. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever experienced, and at the time, we both thought we were goners. My girlfriend and I rented a cabin to take a short vacation on a 3-day weekend. This would have been back around 1990, I guess. Although the cabin had running water and electricity, she had brought a tent with her because she had been given it as a gift years earlier, but never got to use it. She insisted we sleep outside one night for the fun of it. Oh, what fun it turned out to be. In the middle of the night, I smelled a terrible odor and I woke up quickly, thinking I'd gone to the bathroom in my sleeping bag. Sitting up, I was met with the largest face I'd ever seen. It was a lot like a human face, but warped and incorrect somehow. It was colored differently from any face I'd ever seen. I wouldn't even know what to call that color, but it was very dark. The hair was almost more like fur, and it was a dark, reddish color that didn't look like any natural hair I'd ever seen before. The face, by itself, was the size of a 12-year-old boy standing in the entrance to our tent. I rubbed my eyes, hoping the apparition would go away. It didn't. "Shoo!" I said, sounding smaller and weaker than I had intended to sound. The face was instantly, indignantly, angrily, right in my face, pressing me back against the ground, baring its teeth, engulfing me in the feces-like smell of its breath, and growling. I shut up and tried not to gag in the thing's face until it was done growling at me. Now, my girlfriend woke up, cursing at me and telling me I had messed myself in bed when I noticed the huge monkey face in our entrance turned and began studying her curiously. I made a motion to quiet her, but the beast face seemed to think I was going to hurt her because instantly it was directly over me again. It was over my forehead, my eyes, my mouth, my neck, over my chest and my belly. It opened up its mouth and screamed at me. The top of its mouth was over the top of my head, and the bottom seemed to be down around my crotch. This thing could take a bite out of nearly all of me if it wanted to. The smell was so bad. It was the only time in my life I can remember associating physical pain with an odor. The sound of its scream was so loud that I was deafened. The rest was a blur. I could see my girlfriend with her mouth open wide. I think she was screaming as well, but all I could actually hear was a loud, ringing sound. The face seemed surprised and upset about her screaming, and the body that the face was attached to stood up on its hind legs, ripping our tent out of the ground as it rose. Now, it stood bipedally, looming over us, wearing our tent like some kind of a hat. This thing was as big as a small elephant. I don't remember what happened next. My girlfriend told me that we ran into the cabin and that the creature threw rocks at us the rest of the night. I only remember us driving to the hospital the next morning to have someone look at my ears. I've had to be careful with my ears since then, but I'm happy to say they mostly healed. My girlfriend and I stayed friends, but there's something about your love affair being interrupted in the middle of the night by a Bigfoot that smells like crap, which can take the romance out of the best of relationships. Sometimes, when you endure a traumatic episode with someone, it bonds you closer to them. Other times, it drives a kind of a wedge between you two. I would say in this case, it did the latter. I guess it just wasn't meant to be, although not too many affairs can withstand a night when Bigfoot smells your girlfriend's socks. Bigfoot, Rex, brunch. Dear Scary Good, I know you want fictional stories for your channel, but this one is true and happened to me and my best friend and his girlfriend, plus my mom and her boyfriend, and my other friend, Jethro. That's not his real name. My mom's real name is Mom, though. I hope she's okay with me using it for this story. So, one Sunday, my mother and her boyfriend invited everyone out to brunch. We all had separate plans, but pushed them back to later in the day so we could get a free meal, you know? This was about 3 years ago when I was 19, and we all lived in the Pacific Northwest, although I don't want to get more specific than that in case my mom is listening. She told me never to talk about this story. I think we were all 19 when this happened, other than my mom and her boyfriend, of course, who I guess were around 100 each. Oh no, this was 3 years ago, so they were only 97. So we all jumped in this dude's Lexus and off we go to Breakfastland, whatever restaurant they had decided on. We were driving along on this highway and there was no other traffic. It was located in a wooded area and it was a beautiful, clear day. Suddenly, right there in broad daylight, this thing that my mind instantly labeled Bigfoot ran right out onto the road, directly in our path. I say I labeled it Bigfoot, but let me describe what I saw in that second and a half, and you tell me what you would call it. Okay, now it was colored like a black bear, I admit that. And it was standing, and it was probably about the height of a black bear too, but the thing is, what I saw had a much higher waist than a bear does. Its legs lifted up and bent more like a human or an ape. Bears have little tiny legs, relatively speaking, and they bop forward on them, but this thing, whatever it was, lifted its legs off the ground in a full run. I guess the face was sort of like what you would expect a caveman face to be, with a low brow ridge and kind of a gorilla-like nose, but the nostrils were facing a bit down. It was like the missing link between ape and human. It was exactly what I would call Bigfoot, and it was about to smash itself all over the front of my mother's boyfriend's car. He swerved and managed to miss the thing, and we went into a spin out. The car smashed backward into a tree off on the right side of the road, and it made a lot of noise. Although we were shaken up and confused, the worst injury any of us sustained was my friend's girlfriend's broken nail. One of the taillights and the bumper got messed up and the back left tire had blown, but the car itself was mostly okay. We needed to change that tire and get out of there. I volunteered to do it if the other kids stood guard against Bigfoot while I worked. Mom's boyfriend corrected me twice. First, that was a bear, not a Bigfoot. And second, he was calling his service, and I was not going to touch any part of his Lexus that he could prevent me from touching. Nice way to treat a guy who was just volunteering to work for free. So now, we were stuck, having to wait, unable to leave, and we knew that somewhere in those trees all around us, there was at least one very large Sasquatch. What had it been running after? Or was it running from something? What could a Bigfoot be scared of? A chill went through me at the thought. All of us crammed in that car got to talking about the Bigfoot when the boyfriend started shouting at us to stop. He tried to threaten us, but he didn't really have anything to threaten us with. He was living in my mother's home, and we were all over 18, so he couldn't try to claim any of that sort of guardianship crap. We quieted down and listened to him rant about how we weren't allowed to talk about the bear as though it were a Bigfoot. When it seemed he was finally finished, I offered again to change the tire, and everyone else offered to guard me against the Bigfoot while I did it. We all piled out, and so did the boyfriend. He screamed at us that he was the only one that could open the trunk. Then he got back into the car to sulk. The rest of us, having nothing better to do than risk our lives trying to get to see Bigfoot, began wandering around with our cell phone cameras out, trying to do just that. The whole area was so quiet that I couldn't even hear any birds. We all talked about how quiet it was and figured that meant Bigfoot must have left already. My friends started asking how long it was going to take these people to show up and change the tire. None of us had a guess, so he said he was going to wander into the woods and take a pee. We honestly didn't have any sort of spooky vibe at that point, so nobody even made a joke about watch out for Bigfoot or anything like that. We were sort of over it already and more annoyed at how bored we were waiting for the car to get fixed. All of a sudden, from the woods, we heard a sound that I swear was like a woman who was yelling for her life. She wasn't saying any words that I could make out, but it sounded like someone was attacking her, or that she was afraid someone was about to attack her, or something. We all looked at each other wondering what to do when the screaming intensified. Two of us ran into the woods, but we ran smack into our other friend who had gone in to take a pee. He was running out of the forest, and he looked like something really bad had happened to him. I mean, he looked so pale, it was like he was gray, like all the blood had drained from him. His eyes looked past all of us. He ran back toward the road, and we ran after him. When we got to the road, or really just before we came out of the trees and got back to the highway, we heard another scream. This one didn't sound like a woman, though. This one sounded like my mother's stupid boyfriend. We looked down the highway toward the car, which was, I guess, maybe 150 or 200 feet away, and we saw the most incredible thing any of us have ever seen. We saw what must have been a Sasquatch. This one was much, much larger than the last one. This one was not just taller, it was wider. It was standing in front of the car, staring into the front windshield, and it was wider than the car. I could see it around either side. If a grown man stood on the roof of that vehicle, he might see eye to eye with this thing. The monster looked old. It was covered in long gray and black fur over its entire body, except it was patchy on top of its head. The hair under its chin came down to a beard. Its chest was wider than the car. It was like the King Kong of Bigfoot. And then, as I got the camera app on my phone working, it took one sideways leap into the woods and it was gone. It moved so smoothly that I barely heard it land, and the sound of it running away was more the sound of leaves and branches slapping against it as it practically willed itself wherever it wanted to be with incredible swiftness and grace. We all ran to the car, where we found that the boyfriend had actually had some kind of heart attack from the shock. He was awake, but in bad shape. We somehow got him laid down in the back seat. My mother released the trunk, and we changed that tire faster than a team at Indianapolis would have. Obviously, brunch was off, and we had to get the boyfriend to the hospital. The guy survived, but he was sick for a long time, and my mother was too guilty to break up with him until he was either back on his feet or dead. So we all had to endure this guy that none of us really liked for over another year. Thanks, Bigfoot. Oh, before I forget, let me get back to the part about my friend peeing in the woods. A few days later, when we were all discussing what had happened, we started kidding him about how he screamed like a woman, and we asked him what he saw that got him so scared. He told us that he hadn't screamed at all, that he was too scared to scream. We asked him to explain, and he told us this story. I was looking for a spot to do my business, he told us. I found a nice big tree and started getting ready. The tree was so wide, and it was a few inches from my face, so it took up most of my field of vision. I was about 3/4 through when I heard a woman screaming incredibly loudly, and it sounded like she was right next to me, right to my right. I fell over to my left, and I got myself all tangled on a bush, which was almost a lot more painful than it might have been. Thinking that I had frightened a lady by accident, I closed my wardrobe up and looked over to see not a woman at all, but an immense caveman covered in hair with insane-looking eyes. It was bent over, screaming in my face like a woman being beaten, and it was advancing toward me. If it had to bend over for its face to be on my level, I imagine it must have been very tall when standing up. It looked like a man thing, but screamed like a woman. He described its appearance as really much more that of a caveman than the other two monsters we saw, which were both more like a primate version of a black bear. This one was a Bigfoot version of a troll. For instance, he said it had a big nose like an old man from Europe, not an ape-like nose. The face was bearded like that of a human, but the body hair was more fur-like than ours. Did we encounter a tribe of Bigfoot? If so, how do we account for all the different appearances? Is it possible we encountered more than one tribe? Did we stumble into a gathering of clans or some such thing? All I know is I'm glad my mother finally broke up with that guy, and I'm glad we got away from the Bigfoot that wrecked our brunch. Stay tuned, we're taking a school trip to visit the old dude's library next. You're late. I've been waiting for you. Well, I hope you're comfortable. My library is the state of the art in comfort. Well, it was when it was built anyway. Or so I've been told. I mean, that was long before I was born. I would turn on more lights, but they hurt my eyes when I'm reading. And you do want me to read you this scary story, don't you? It's one I didn't write. I found it here in the library. It's written in this strange, dark red liquid. I don't know why. The entire thing is in longhand. It seems to have been written with a quill. There's no date on it, but I'm going to guess the early half of the 20th century. The language is pretty modern, so I'm thinking probably the 1930s or afterward. It's in a book entitled Notes by F.N., and I have yet to decipher those initials. I don't know who wrote this. Possibly it was an ancestor of mine, but my last name does not begin with an N, nor does that of anyone else I'm aware of being related to. The author seems to be an adult male, and although the account reads as a narrative, there are notes written on the side where he seems to be asking himself or someone else what he should feel or how he should react to the occurrences in the main text. And now I'll read that main text to you. For the last 3 nights, I have been visited each night by the most horrific vision my eyes have ever been forced to attempt to interpret. Each of these 3 nights, the visage appears at my bedroom window and looks in at me. The first night, all I saw was its eyes, which glowed a bright yellow in the darkness. I found them blinding to look into, like 2 little suns. The second night, it was all I could do to remove my gaze from those eyes. I don't even remember waking up. I was asleep. Then, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring directly into the eyes of this creature, or force, or spirit. On the third night, last night, I was standing when I became aware of myself, standing and facing the window in my bedroom. I saw both my own reflection and the sight of the creature beyond, as if both were superimposed over each other. It was the same size as me. It was somehow part of me, and yet now I could see that it was not a man like I was. It was a beast that stood like a man. It was more of a savage canine than a human, having immense teeth and the look of a hungry animal about it. There was no civilization in this thing. I never know what happens after the dog thing comes, but I know I wake up exhausted. Sleep tires me more than work. I fear that I am lost, or soon will be. Is the dog thing a demon sent to torment me? Or is it trying to speak to me? Is it really part of me? Am I doing this to myself? Tonight is the night of the full moon, and I know that my counterpart will be coming into my room this time. I know he will not stop at the barrier of the window. I know that after tonight, my life will never be the same. Unless I can stop tonight from coming into my life at all. How does one kill the night? How does one stop the inevitable? And the narrative ends there. It's the last thing written in the book at all. It looks like FN found what he was looking for. I hope you found what you were looking for too. I had a lot of fun visiting the old dude's library yesterday, so why don't we go get him to tell us a really scary story this time. Take it away, old dude. The face on my son's bedroom floor. How many of you have ever seen a face form on a floor? I don't mean how many of you have imagined seeing faces in the wood grain of a floor. I'm asking you, how many of you have actually seen a face form in a floor? They do that, you know. I saw it happen in my son's floor. Of course, at first I was the same as you. I didn't think that faces could form in the floor, but I was naive then. As naive as you are now. No offense. Everything started one night when my son came into my bedroom, my and his mother Gloria's bedroom. Let's call my son Snarky, because that's the way he was back then. It was annoying, but every time the kid bugged me, I would remind myself that I would miss it when he grew up and learned to behave. And sure enough, now I do miss the way he used to bother Gloria and myself. So, like I was saying, on this one particular night, he bothered me and his mom about a face on his bedroom floor. I laughed, but Gloria gave me a look and hopped out of bed to go back with him and see what he was talking about. She came back into our room far more quickly than I expected, and with a shaken appearance. She told me I had to go in there and take care of this, and she was not joking around. I got out of bed and put on my slippers in case the face was going to bite me. I was still chuckling to myself, wondering what I was going to find. It hadn't really registered on me yet that both my wife and son looked utterly horrified and shocked by what they had seen. I was still convinced it was the two of them overreacting. And then I saw it, and I almost choked. This wasn't just a face on the floor. It was the most intricately drawn, grotesque face you could ever imagine. Although a monochrome line drawing within the wooden floor itself, it featured every blemish and wart and vein on the face, the eyelids, the nose hairs, The thing looked diseased, or maybe dead, because its eyes were shut. The lines were all drawn 3 times thick in every place, and in such a tight way that they seemed to be almost pulsing. As your eyes moved, it created this optical illusion that was extremely distracting and disorienting. It felt almost like I was going to fall over. The design made me dizzy, and yet the details of the face were so horrific. It was almost as though the face itself were an obscenity. Did you get rid of it? My wife demanded to know. Get rid of it? How? It was embedded in the wood grain. She told me it wasn't in the wood grain. It was impossible for it to be in the wood grain, and the face hadn't been there before tonight. She must have been correct about that last part, because we certainly would have noticed it before if it had been there. I was confused and didn't know what to do. I just wanted to go to bed and think about it in the morning, but my wife made a big deal out of it and wouldn't allow her son to sleep in that room, etc., etc., etc. So I moved his bed into our room, and I was finally allowed to get some sleep. In the morning, Gloria woke up before me, and then she woke me up. With a horrified scream from my son's room, I ran in there, expecting to find her being chased around by a rat or something, but she was just staring at the floor. The face had changed. It had grown larger, and one of the eyes appeared to be opening as well. I started putting forth a theory that the wood in the floor was warping, and this was pareidolia. My wife wouldn't even let me finish my thought. She was furious at me, as though this were all somehow my fault. I told her I had to go to work and we could talk about it when I got home. That was not satisfactory to her, and she chased me out of the house and screamed at me as I drove to work. I have no idea how many of the neighbors saw this spectacle. I mentally put blinders on and just went to do my job. When I got home, my wife was weeping, and my son very stressed out. The face had grown larger, they told me. I went in the room, and I saw that it had in fact grown to over a foot in diameter, but also that the eyes had both opened fully, and that they glared at me with utter loathing that made me feel very sad and kind of frightened. I never felt so disliked before. I felt guilty and ashamed, as though those eyes knew everything wrong with me. I tried to move away so that it wouldn't appear to be looking at me anymore, but wherever I went, the eyes kept staring at me, glaring at me. Then I noticed the mouth. The mouth had seemed open before, but now it was opened much, much wider. And not only that, but there appeared to be a dimensional aspect to it. I really felt like I was looking into its mouth, that it wasn't just a dark little depression on my son's floor. No, that mouth looked like it opened up into a vast other reality. The more I looked into it, the more I could see that there were tiny lights in the darkness. It seemed to be like staring out into space instead of staring down into a floor. I got down on my hands and knees to look more closely, and my wife screamed at me to stop. Stop staring at it, she insisted. Stop feeding it. It feeds on our attention and it grows larger. I wanted to call in a priest, but my wife was an atheist, and she wanted our son raised without religious influence. This was the 1970s. A lot of people were questioning traditional ways of raising kids. She didn't know I had snuck him into church one Sunday morning with my parents to get him baptized. I love that boy, and I didn't want to take a chance that my wife was wrong about the whole God thing. It didn't matter anyway, though. All the religions and superstitions in the world wouldn't have stopped that face from growing on my son's bedroom floor. Because that's what it was doing. It was growing like a fungus. Maybe that's what it was. That's as good a theory as any. My son slept in our room every night now, and the face grew larger and more terrifying looking every morning. One night, I had a horrible dream. I dreamed that my son was screaming, and when I ran into his room, he was being swallowed up by the face on the floor. I tried to pull him out, but I couldn't. The more I tried to hold on to him, the slipperier we both got, and I watched as my son got swallowed up by that void with the lights in it behind the creature's mouth. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, and sat up looking for my son. He was not in our room. I got up and ran to his. My wife was awakened by all this and was asking me what was happening. When I got to Snarky's room, I looked for the face on the floor, but it was gone. My wife came up behind me and gave a cheer. "The face is gone," she shouted. "Now life can finally go back to normal." "No, it can't," I corrected her. "Not until we find our son." And so, we called for him, and we searched for him. That was 45 years ago. My wife testified against me to the police and in court, claiming I drew a face on the floor to confuse her, then did away with our only son. I don't know how she could think that. The situation must have driven her insane. Nevertheless, I've served my time, and I'm due to come back out in May. Gloria has made it clear that I'm never to contact her again. When I think back on the times when Snarky used to bother me, used to need my attention when I was busy, used to keep me from getting a full night's sleep because he heard a dog howl outside. Now when I think back on all those annoying times, those are the happy times. Those are the only happy times I guess I ever had. Maybe they're the only happy times I ever will have. And that's all because of the face on my son's bedroom floor. I love a happy ending, don't you? And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Come back for more scary stories.